All right, folks, let's do this full moon lunar eclipse in Sagittarius video that has been building up over the past 3 or 4 videos that I've done. I'm not going to focus on regurgitating a lot of the information I set out in the last 2 videos that I did on Jupiter in Pisces and Venus in Gemini, and indeed 4 videos ago, Mercury in Gemini. All those videos you'll find in the list of videos wherever you find them on YouTube. I'm going to summarize energies, talk about things specifically from the perspective of this full moon lunar eclipse so that we can integrate what we know and take it from there. There will be some repetition, understandably, and this video will be titled strongly. Those of you who've been with me for the ride, and I think you will know if you watch other astrologers as well that there are heads ups or warnings about this. The videos worded strongly with regard to deception, but really even words like delusion or confusion. Confusion, in many respects, confusion would be a great word for this particular eclipse, for this particular full moon eclipse. I'm gonna see how I feel when I upload it, whether I'm gonna keep it a deception or confusion. I do. If people are dealing with energies that are even slightly deceptive, I do want them to pay attention to the astrology of the time so that appropriate actions can be taken, or at least an appropriate outlook or an appropriate approach that makes each person comfortable can be taken, keeping in mind that on some level everyone may be viewing everyone as being somewhat underhanded or deceptive during this time because the transits in question are happening in everybody else's charts. All right, so first and foremost, let's talk about the full moon lunar eclipse in and of itself. It is a full moon, so coming up to it, things may escalate or feel elevated, or some people may get an offer, or something may come to completion, or a project may come to completion. Some people may be pushed into the limelight in positive or challenging ways. The moon, the disk of the moon is full, which means that there may be something is exposed, there's some sort of clarity. More than anything else, the moon governs our intuitive and emotional lives, our sense of contentment. So it's very likely that as we get to it, either that contentment is delivered or else it is rocked for some reason. Either it is an emotional reason or it is an intuitive reason, and the disturbance can often spill out emotionally at the time of a full moon. Emotions can be heightened. People may find themselves more sensual, more anxious, more full moony, more wolfy, more that you may have to deal with your own or someone else's tantrum. And I always say with a full moon, pay attention to what is being revealed and pay attention to what is being expressed. So even if you're doing some expression to yourself, discernment. This is a full moon of discernment, and this is something that I haven't touched on a great deal. The Mercury retrograde, which happens on the 29th of May, so in 3 or 4 days' time, is in some ways very welcome at this time, because this idea of investigation and investigating and slowing down and going over the details and re-looking at everything and not being so rushed. Remember that the Mercury retrograde is coming after the end of March. We had all planets direct, and finally in May a few of the planets have gone retrograde, but really the only planet for us in terms of forward movement that goes retrograde is Mercury. The other planets, Saturn specifically, and Uranus, shortly, they're going retrograde and forward is just part of their overall forward movement, essentially. With Mercury and Venus and Mars, we experience much bigger slowdowns and much bigger frustrations. So there's always, with an upcoming Mercury retrograde, a sense of things have galloped forward and moved forward, and we find ourselves in a certain space, and our minds need to, at some point, even if it doesn't feel like it, catch up with where we are. What has happened over the past 3 months, 2 or 3 months, end of March to end April, and April to end May, 2 months. What has happened? How much has happened? What has ended? What is beginning? What is brewing? What is fomenting? And somewhere our minds may need to call a bit of a timeout, and a lot of the energy is communication based. When I say that this is a full moon of discernment, the sun is in Gemini and the moon is in Sagittarius. And that polarity is very much a polarity between our lower mind, as symbolized by both Mercury and the sign of Gemini, and our higher mind, uh, symbolized by the planets Jupiter and the sign of Sagittarius. Now, it is easy and somewhat fashionable these days to knock the sign of Gemini, and to emphasize its gossipy, um, volatile, mercurial, unpredictable, changeable, salesy, sleazy side. I would encourage you to ensure that you are embracing your Gemini side, because the idea of being a part of a community, and knowing where you fit in, and knowing how to avail of opportunities, and knowing how to use those opportunities to construct your place within it, and from within that place be able to serve and experience abundance. Remember, I always say that the quality of our abundance is dependent on the quality of our relationships. Then somewhere there, the community plays an extremely important role. Communications play an extremely important role. Who are you in communication? Who are you in community? What are you hearing? How do you hear of opportunities? How do you know to get your resume out there, interview, sales, all those kind of Geminian things. At the same time, at the level of Gemini and with Mercury, everything is being worked out here. And the challenge and what the full moon is bringing at a time when we've got the Sun in Gemini and Venus in Gemini and Mercury in Gemini about to go retrograde and Mercury and Venus squaring Neptune and Pisces, there is somewhere in the sign of Sagittarius, the sign of remove and intuition and our guides and the occult on some level and our spiritual, our true self, a higher mind. What happens when this is quiet? What happens when we meditate? What happens when we're doing something else? The sign of insight, the sign of the real truth. The mind is always trying to catch up to the truth, and especially right now finds itself fogged in with these kind of Neptunian influences. So the idea of investigation, the idea of being a little still, this might be a surprisingly introverted full moon eclipse for many, insofar as part of it is not all of us are out of lockdown, and part of it might be that our meltdowns may be a little private and maybe confused. And so somewhere there's this question of this full moon, and I'm reminded with this full moon of the moon in the Rider-Waite tarot deck, where you have these animals looking up at the full moon, kind of hair standing on end a little bit, where it's like, I don't know, it's a feeling. So that's why in my videos so far, I've really emphasized the idea of investigation, of not overreacting, of doing what you need to that feels right, that is appropriately self-protective, because the idea that someone may be making a claim on your power, whether it is romantically, whether it is sensually, whether it is spiritually, whether it is financially, whether it is in any kind of relationship context, is real. The astrology is there. So the idea of setting up boundaries where there's a lack of clarity, but a feeling, an intuitive red flag. And, in that last video I said, if the work right now we're doing is really around determining whether we are having to move a bee or a fly out of the room or fight a grizzly, let's do that work rather than go in with grizzly fighting mode. But doing that work means that a certain amount of homework needs to be done. Whether you need to get the appropriate help from the right people, have that lined up. So slow and steady, calm, prepared, so that you can determine and discern in your quieter moments and allow yourself to be guided. Sagittarius is a sign that asks for and receives and welcomes guidance and builds a relationship with the divine or the spiritual. Gemini is preoccupied with the material and what is going on around it, the interactions, listening, talking. So with the Sagittarius full moon, it could be that and I'm for once talking more about the signs and the archetypes. Remember that the houses that these fall in, the house where Gemini sits, the house where Sagittarius sits, the house where Pisces sit, are more important, and where they are in your chart, and which houses they occupy in your chart and what those houses stand for. But the sign also it gives you, if the houses are the what, the sign is the how, and it gives you a sense of what is at work here. Where is that confusion? And there's something about communication and understanding and insight that is a little bit blocked, but the red flags have been and are being raised. So it's a question of how alarmed do we get? There are reasons not to panic, and they are that yes, Venus, the planet of money and relationships, is squaring Neptune at the time of this eclipse, and Mercury is about to go retrograde, also squaring Neptune. After the eclipse, a few days after the eclipse, on the day that Mercury goes retrograde on the 29th, Venus and Mercury meet up. So and Mercury squares Neptune 3 times. It's already squared once, it'll square it again 2 more times. There's something here that is being worked out. There's something here that needs to be investigated. There's something here that needs to be grappled with. And like all things that need to be grappled with, keeping in mind that our actions also have ripple effects will be helpful, because it'll give you a sense of, if a bear, I don't know why bears are so important, and grizzlies especially, kind of a don't poke the bear until you're ready, kind of analogy. So, just do your due diligence. In addition, Mars trines Neptune, so the planet that allows us to deal with attacks and allows us to defend is there to help. The only thing is, and you may be feeling this, is that with Mars in Cancer, it needs to come from a protective and a nurturing and a self-protective place, but it's hard to marshal that Mars energy when it's in Cancer, because it's a little dampened by Cancerian emotionalism, whereas Mars really needs to be an environment that is less watery in order to function at its best. The self-protective, the energy can get, it's a little bit like the, sort of hot ball of fire. The red planet is kind of squashed in a lot of water, and so the flames are having to, it's just like, it's a lot of steam, again with the foggy metaphors, but the energy is available to you. And when Venus and Mercury retrograde, there's something to this as a story where, at the time of the eclipse, Venus is getting ready to square Neptune the day after the eclipse, and then 2 days after it meets up with Mercury retrograde. It's almost like a series of conversations, as if to say, whatever's been set up, whatever's happening, whatever's happened, I'm letting you know, Mercury, that you need to go retrograde and research it out. So research it out and be prepared to do it. The full moon lunar eclipse, as I've mentioned in yesterday's video on Jupiter and Pisces, is square Jupiter. And as I've mentioned, the faster moving planets, the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, need to do their work so that Jupiter can impart its gift, its auspicious new beginning, which is often disguised as an ending. It's not always, more often than not, it's not bounty as much as it is the rug being pulled from under our feet to create that auspicious new beginning. And as I've explained, crises, or the part of your life where there were crises in 2015, 2016, are ready for something new and for a new energy and for an ending and a new beginning and for the slate to be wiped clean a certain amount. But if Jupiter is busy baking you a fruitcake, you need to make sure over this summer till about, starting now till about August the 11th, you need to make sure that there are no fruit flies that are going to, or fly, or anything. If that cake is meant for you, then you need to make sure that there's nobody else who's trying to, make a claim for that cake. Jupiter, very likely. It's nice that I can think about Jupiter baking a cake. And remember that Jupiter in Pisces is here over the summer and then even longer next year. And it's next year that a lot of that sustained activity takes place. But there's a cleanup that we need to do now, which brings me to the point that, yes, this is a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, but on December the 3rd of this year, we're going to have a new moon solar eclipse in Sagittarius as well. So from December the 3rd of this year to February the 3rd of next year, we're going to be playing in these energies again. Again, there's a sense of the story isn't complete, but I really don't want you to take the story isn't complete idea as a reason to procrastinate. Dramatic pause. So do not procrastinate. If your intuition is flagging something, you can't make sense of it, you find yourself really attracted to someone, I'm thinking about Neptunian things, you're thinking of giving up and sitting on the pavement and becoming a Sufi poet, or someone is potentially stealing something from you or doing some hanky-panky, or there's some deception, which is really where a lot of the energy sits. So there's some confusion, or there's delusion. You're deluding yourself. You know, sometimes there is that thing of, because some of it may be a little diluted, some of it may be exaggerated. With Jupiter squaring, you know, there can be a grandiosity even to our intuition sometimes, which is why investigating whether it is a bee that needs to be chased out of a room or grizzly you need to fight, you know, figure out what you need to do and figure out how you're going to do it without poking either the bear or the grizzly, because, you know, you don't want to deal with the consequences of that. Let me see, is there anything? A few other things. One thing I wanted to, when you have a full moon on an axis before the new moon, the full moon is setting up something that can then be moved forward with the new moon. Another reason not to despair, but to be in action and start the investigation. If all you need to do is make a list of the things that are disturbing you, or where you feel like someone is making a claim to your power, and making a claim makes it sound like there's a legitimacy to it, you're not going to feel like there is, and there probably isn't with Neptune. So they're involved. And with the Mercury retrograde. So it's not, wherever you feel like somewhere you're having a hard time standing in your power, make a list of that and figure out how you're going to gently, classily deal with asking the questions and doing what needs to be done. The full moon is in Sagittarius, but the planets are floating about in Gemini. So chatter, questions, writing, communications, WhatsApp, social media, Facebook, emails, phone conversations, FaceTime, you know, all of that is very much in the mix. And also hearing things from within the community, hearing things from colleagues, or chatter, talking, what are you saying? What does this mean? What are you doing? What is going on? What? You do, on some intuitive level, know something. You may not be able to put it in words, and your mind may not be able to articulate or process it. And so it becomes important to, at this moments like this, to kind of slow down. Remember, God has taken the wheel, but God is sitting next to you. Do not go into a kerfuffle and start spinning around, because that is not going to help anyone, not God, not you. And just figure out what you need to know, what will be revealed to you, what will not, where to ask the questions, where to get clear. In certain places you will ask questions and you will be given the gift of peace. In certain places, or resolution, or you'll say, oh, I thought this was a bear and this is not even a bee. In certain cases you will ask questions and you'll get the, I got something, it's still not clear, but I got something and that red flag is still waving. You know, that's how we go through it. And remember, Jupiter wants you to do this work, because between the summer of this year and next year, it wants to create something for you. You know, it wants to finally resolve and heal and gift you something in this part of the chart where there was a crisis in 2015, 2016. The new moon solar eclipse that is in Gemini is not going to have a corresponding lunar eclipse in Gemini. The next lunar eclipse is in Taurus on November the 19th. So what's interesting is that both the solar eclipse on June the 11th, for which this full moon is setting things up, the pot is being stirred. You will and you should be in action, but I will not be surprised if a lot of action gathers momentum after the solar eclipse on June the 11th, which is going to be conjunct Mercury retrograde. I can't make this up, and is square Neptune. So the energy of investigation and the energy of dealing with the bee or dealing with the bear, for a few of us imaginary, but even then, deal with it so it's not buzzing around in your brain. But for most of us, real, it's an energy that will continue to escalate. This is just the, hey, I'm waving a flag at you. The universe is waving a flag at you, and you want to see where you're going to end up at the other end of it, probably by August 11th, but even by the end of June and into July, things will start to, there will be more clarity about the non-clarity, okay? You may never get the full answer as to someone's shady manipulations. There may be a certain amount of gaslighting, but there will be enough that emerges in terms of fact, and communication will play a large part in this that will give you a sense of what to do and how to move forward. So whatever is being stirred up over these past couple of weeks, past few weeks, December 14th of last year, new moon in Sagittarius, solar eclipse. February 14th, 2 months after that date, important. March the 26th, 2 months before tomorrow, important. May the 26th, important. Whatever has been escalating here It's an eclipse of release. What do you need to release? So yes, let me bring this back down to the eclipse idea as well. Wherever Sagittarius sits in your chart, whichever house it occupies, outside of this Neptunian energy that we've been talking about, that is important because the full moon in Sagittarius, Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter, Jupiter in Pisces, Pisces ruled by Jupiter and Neptune. We've talked about the squares with Neptune, we've talked about the square with Jupiter. Jupiter and Neptune are very, very powerful at this time and at this eclipse. So the pot is being stirred for some things to start to get investigated and uncovered now, but after June the 11th, we'll gather even more direction and we'll have a Mercury retrograde flavor. Things, people, situations from the past, or rather than having a sense of clarity and moving forward with action with haste, almost a need to kind of discern and make sure the details are taken care of. It has that kind of quality to it. Now, let's come back to the full moon eclipse in and of itself in the sign of Sagittarius. Wherever Sagittarius sits in your chart, something needs to be released. Something, whatever house that is and whatever house that occupies. Something wants to be concluded. Something needs to be released. Something that is overdeveloped. More of a strength than it needs to be. Something that you're holding onto and is no longer serving you. These could be lessons that need to be learned. These could be things that take you to the next level in this particular part of the chart. This could be something material, like a relationship, or something material that has to be released. This could be something to do with making room for a better version of whatever it is that this stands for. You're going to need to know your chart, but it is an eclipse of release, and there's something here right now about also finding a healthier relationship and a dynamic these days till the middle of next year, with the North Node eclipses in Gemini and the South Node eclipses in Sagittarius. There's a need to balance your intuition and to bring in communication and Gemini energies to be able to navigate the time. Typically, we tell people to trust their intuition. There's a need to learn how to let your intuition raise a red flag, but then utilize the energy of Gemini, the talking, the speaking, the asking questions, the communicating, to be able to determine what is going on and to be able to nip things in the bud if they need to be nipped in the bud. It isn't, more often than not, we will give the advice, trust your intuition, pay attention to it, trust what you need to, but the skill development for all of us is in Gemini, is in picking up the phone, sending the email, being in communication, being in contact, talking, listening, writing. Something disturbs you, figure out what you want to do about it, get the right kind of help. Is it legal help? Is it financial help? Whatever it is, and deal with it. Do not be in a space of remove or intuitive superiority or watchfulness. There are times when you want to stay out of the fray. With the North Node in Gemini and these eclipses, you need to get into the fray. And after June the 11th, you will have to get into the fray with that solar eclipse. Is there anything else that I really want to highlight right now? I feel like I've highlighted a lot. Yes, one more aspect that is being encoded with this full moon lunar eclipse is Saturn square Uranus. This is a major theme all of this year. Saturn is now retrograde. Uranus is in Taurus. Saturn is in Aquarius, and Saturn and Uranus are going to square again on June the 14th. And again, please remember, if you know where Saturn and Uranus are in your chart, please remember that the place where Uranus is trying to liberate you is dependent on the actions that you take, not the path of least resistance, the actions that you take that are disciplined and are actions geared towards fulfilling your highest potential, where Aquarius sits in your chart. Saturn is in Aquarius. It is teaching you things. It is bringing to your attention patterns and behaviors that have not been serving you. It wants to impose a sense of discipline. It wants you to get to the next level. It wants you to stop making the same mistakes. It wants you to act in your best interest. It will be relentless to do so, and it will punish you during this time if you do. It will keep smacking you. It's sort of the Saturn strict teacher component. And if you incorporate the lessons, it will reward you handsomely. It is not done. The fact that it's going retrograde is helpful because there's this thing of, let's go back, let's relearn this lesson. Let's go through the lesson plan again. Let's go through these chapters again. So important that wherever Aquarius sits in your chart, make sure that you are not falling into the path of least resistance. And if some of these protective energies are related to that we're talking about, the sign of Aquarius where it sits in your chart, know that for Uranus to liberate you wherever it is in Taurus over the next 5 years or so, Saturn, the faster moving planet in this case, needs to do its job. Otherwise, you will find yourself stymied potentially, or you will find that liberation checked. All right, I'm going to leave it at this. If you found this useful, etc., share it. Try and have a relatively pull your energy in with this full moon if you can, and just Sagittarius is the sign of your compass. Get a blank piece of paper in front of you, get your compass in front of you, and figure out what it is in terms of the themes of this video, where you feel your power is somehow being compromised, taken away, being gaslit, where there might be some deception, where there's some confusion. If it is relationship and financial, that's very much at the center of this, but it could be romantic, it could be spiritual, it could be, so just pay attention to all those energies, and rather than just make a list and figure out how you want to use the powers of communication to nip certain things in the bud to the best of your ability. In some of these cases, you may well feel that before you take any action, before you poke the bear, or before you do something that has a ripple effect that is challenging, it may be appropriate to get the right kind of assistance, whether it is legal, whether it is financial. Who are the right people who can actually guide you and say, this is the best way to handle the situation, this is what you should say, this is what you should not say, this is what this means, blah, 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 blah. It's not that way for everybody. It will be for some people. It will be for some people. Sagittarius is a sign of justice and laws and integrity and values, not necessarily always the man-made side of the system, in fact, not usually, but all of that sits there in terms of what is truly right and what is wrong, and what has integrity, and where are people telling the truth and acting with integrity, and where they're not. Those questions, this is where the full moon sits, guys. So, just pull your energy in, get your compass out, figure out how you want to proceed, and go for it. I'm just looking at the time. I don't want this to stop. Share, like, subscribe, click bell icon next to subscribe button so you're notified. Comment if you feel inclined. My contact information is in the description box below. You can inquire about rates for readings, or I also make an easy to read version of the chart that tells you which signs are in which houses and which planets are in which houses and what those houses mean. If you want to inquire for rates, you can do so using that email address. I will leave it at that. There's more to come. So get ready to take some peaceful, determined action, and do not go into panic mode. Do not go into panic mode. Eclipses happen to knock us out of our inertia, and these are eclipses that are trying to move us forward. No resistance, but necessary action that needs to be taken to facilitate moving forward freely into a happier future. Those are the actions that we should be meditating on and taking. All right, I will talk to you soon.